David Andrew Wiebe Interviews and Music Business Podcast, Episode 19. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, David Andrew Wiebe. This is the David Andrew Wiebe Interviews and Music Business Podcast, a podcast for forward-looking musicians. Sitting here with me today is Angie Robertson. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. We'll be bantering and talking throughout the show, but first of all, I just wanted to wish our listeners a very happy new year. Hope you are having an excellent year so far. I believe it is January 15th as we sit down today. Normally, I would go into a whole bunch of announcements and some rants and some updates, and usually there's a big list of things that I like to get into, but I figured I would try to narrow the subject for today's podcast at least, and I'm looking at doing maybe a bi-weekly schedule for the podcast this year, so I figured I would maybe narrow the subject matter a little bit, at least for this show, and see how that goes. But I will still nevertheless go through a few announcements before we get to the main show. And one is that there's a show coming up on the 21st. That's next week already. Well, at the House Coffee Sanctuary, probably starting at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. It's a Not a Number Records Artist Showcase, and if you'd listened to the previous episode, in episode 18, talked to Nathaniel Krieger about his record company and the possible partnership there that I might have with him. So come on out if you are in the Calgary area, and you'll be seeing me play and Nathaniel play, and a few others. I believe his brother will be playing as well, Ben Krieger. So should be good times. So for today's opening segment, I wanted to talk about victories in 2010. I got out a notebook pretty much in the new year, and I figured I would start writing out some of the things that happened in 2010, and I gotta be honest, I was probably prepared to write out all the bad things and the good things that happened, but probably a lot of the bad things. But what I ended up doing was I ended up writing out all the victories instead that I had in 2010, and there was definitely some cool things as I started to look back. There were some big victories for me. How about you, Angie?
I had some highs and lows this year. I definitely had some highs and lows. But the funny thing is, when you start talking about mentioning the good things and the bad things, is in some of the bad things, I mean, those were exhilarating. When you think about it, I mean, they might be bad initially, but you look back at it and you realize just how good they were. So
that's right. Sometimes bad things have a way of turning into better things, and that's we can get kind of narrow-minded in our perspective and think, well, this is a terrible, horrible event, and we have yet to see it play it out because we don't see it from the perspective of our entire life. We see it from the perspective of what it means and what it looks like now.
There's something to be said for being in the moment, but there's also something to be said for learning from the past.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the victories that I had, one of them is that I got my tracks for my upcoming album to actually be able to work on them again, so that's pretty exciting. And I gotta say, some of the biggest ones were definitely in relationships and personal. Would you say that resonates with you as well?
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of real changes in my relationships in the last year, and some really positive things. I'm not complaining. Yeah, I'm not complaining. Some really good things happened.
Well, we don't want to pry into your personal life, but do you care to give any examples?
Well, something that I initially thought would be bad was, you could call it the divorcing of friends. Realizing there were certain relationships in my life that were a little less than healthy, and walking away, but walking into healthier relationships and deeper friendships. through that.
Definitely. Some of our listeners might be wondering exactly why this is relevant to music, but I think it's just kind of a useful thing or useful tool personally to write out the victories and then have a look at the positive and the lighter side of life rather than the darker side. Obviously, there's challenges and sometimes new challenges as we grow older, but they're not always life-threatening per se. They still have kind of a positive side to them.
Even the things that can be life-threatening, it's funny. You hear people talk about cancer and all kinds of crazy things, but something for me that's really resonating right now is one of my dear friends passed away a year and a week ago, a few days after New Year's, and everybody was feeling really terrible because she was such an amazing humanitarian and such a lovely woman, and how's she going to keep doing her work? But her work has inspired so many people since then. There's a foundation in her name, and even in that life-threatening situation, that situation where she passed away, she was able to give life through organ donation to something like 36 people.
Wow.
And, I think it was actually more than that. I think she saved 8 lives that night and helped many, many more people. There's someone seeing through her eyes right now, and she was an artist, so how amazing is that? So I think we need to see beyond the bad.
Definitely. And that's sometimes telling of just kind of the capacity of a person. Like, they could be struggling with a disease or some kind of issue their whole life, and they can still make the most of it and have an impact regardless of what that handicap looks like.
It transfers over to music beautifully, though, too.
Yeah.
Relationships are so important in music.
That's right.
And adversity, it gives you something to write about. We're artists. We feel like we feel so deeply that it can only come out of us in this way. We help people to process those things. And I think we sometimes forget that in struggling and dealing with our own things, we're helping other people who are listening to our music.
Right.
And we forget the positive impact that can have, I think, sometimes.
That's sort of been my learning experience, at least in the last little while. It's just been that I was talking to my friend Pat, and he's been on the podcast as well. I believe it was episode 4. I was talking to him about creativity and how I felt somewhat stifled by my current circumstances and situations, but instead he sort of just pointed me to the fact that, well, maybe it's these very circumstances and situations that are bringing a different type of creativity out of you, which brought perspective to me for sure.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, even right now I'm working on a piece of music that I would really like to burn. I have no nice way to put it. It's not my writing, and the kind of musician I am, it requires that I interpret other people's work. I wrote it off the second I saw it. And in reading the notes written by the composer, I'm seeing that there is so much more meaning behind it, and that it is there for us to process things. And there is going to be something positive. I'm struggling, I'm not going to lie. But I'm sure it'll be really, really good when we perform it. I've experienced that before.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to talk about with Victories in 2010?
Victories in 2010. I had a really kind of cool one, and it was different for me because I wasn't performing, and it's nice to be involved with the show and not be on stage. And that would be Boob Rock, which you were involved with.
Right. Can we say that on the podcast?
Can I say the word boob? Certainly in working on Boob Rock and promoting it, there were much more other terms tossed around, especially at CJSW. So it was lovely. It was kind of neat to be on the promotion side. It was neat to be organizing and sticking myself out there in that kind of a way. But it was fun to sit back and watch a group of musicians get on the stage and just give her and have a good time and have fun and just enjoy themselves. And it was a very different experience for me because I wasn't on stage. I wasn't the one in the spotlight, but I was involved, and it was just so much fun and such a great experience. And I'm very excited for 2011.
Me too. I have a feeling that this is going to be one of the most pivotal, best years ever for me.
And actually, now that we're starting to discuss music a little bit more, I'm reminded of another victory this year. Is for me, it was probably a little thing for you, but for me, getting in the studio with you and doing that one demo for me gave me a lot of confidence. I never ever, with my background, would have expected myself to be doing any recording, really.
That sort of segues nicely into a project that I've been working on. It's sort of been kept secret, but I figure I'll announce it now because I've already told some of my fans and friends. and that is that I'm releasing all the demos that I shouldn't say all, but a select number of demos that I recorded in 2010 and going to be releasing for free on my website. And that should also be coming through in the podcast feed with some additional commentary. So if you're already subscribed, you'll get them. But I think that'll be a really cool thing as well, to get music out there a little bit.
It's good to get things out there.
Yeah, feels good to have things released. All right, well, we're going to move on to the feature segment right after this. Visit us online at www.daw-music.com/daw-podcast. And don't forget to spread the word. Tell your friends about this podcast. This next segment is my interview with Angie Robertson. However, you should know that I decided to break up this interview into 2 parts. So you will be hearing the second part in the next episode. All right, so we're back. And again, I'm talking with Angie Robertson today. She would be our very first female guest on the podcast.
Booby power. Can I say that on the podcast?
Oh, goodness. This is going downhill in a hurry, isn't it?
Taking you to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
I'll be good.
All right. Hey, why don't you start by talking about your musical background?
My musical background, I think most of my musical education happened growing up with my dad in a band, listening to the band, getting to hang out while they were in the studio, listening to a lot of different things, growing up on 80s rock and roll.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's wondering what the heck happened, because I'm a classical musician now. I started with vocal jazz in high school, really enjoyed it, worked hard at it, started taking voice lessons, playing around with classical as well. Really, really wanted to do jazz at the time, thought that was all I could do and all I was good for. While I was in Portland touring with a dinner theater, I got the opportunity to audition for opera school. Did not get in, but learned that I actually have an opera voice and can do a bit of classical, and that's fine. I enjoy not necessarily doing opera, but I sing currently with a philharmonic. I love getting to interpret other people's music. I love the beauty of what was written, what's been written throughout history and what's still being written in classical music. It's a really exciting and diverse field of music.
Now, you also have a fairly diverse background in other arts, right? Not just music.
I would say music is probably my weakest art, but that would be me personally. I have been a professional touring lighting designer. I've written and produced a play with a friend of mine. We both wrote it together. I produced, she directed. I've performed a bit. I've done a bit of improvisation and a bit of Irish dancing. I'm a little on the artsy side. I also am a former board member for the Calgary Fringe Festival.
Right. So you would say that you're fairly well-rounded, or do you have a favorite in the bunch?
I certainly enjoy lighting, and I feel like a different person when I'm doing music. And it's really funny to explain to someone that I feel captivating when I sing, but I do. I feel beautiful. I feel, and it's funny because it's such a non-visual art, but that's how I feel when I sing. I feel like I am me. I feel like I'm getting to be who I am.
Now, that's a cool thought for sure. I don't know if many people kind of think about how they feel on stage or how the music is affecting them. Certainly the vibrations that come out of music, definitely a wide spectrum of different people and different audiences relating to it. You wouldn't necessarily see all these people in the same place unless it was for that music, that's what brought them together.
I love in music how somebody can sit down and write a piece of music with a certain emotion and feeling, and that same piece of music can be played to someone 50 years later in a different room by someone else.
Right.
I'm thinking of and I can't for the life of me remember what it's called. There was a song written during World War II about experiences in Germany by soldiers, and then, I think it was 50 years later, it was being played for some seniors, and the one guy just started crying. And what's going on? Well, that reminds me of being in the war. And I love how music just can transcend, or I love how you'll be doing Requiem, and was written by Mozart while he was dying, and I sing it and my heart breaks for him. Your heart, you can't not be affected when you hear it. And I love that music can do that. I love that you can convey that. And it's funny, I still feel beautiful even if that's what my what's the word? What my job is to convey death and to convey pain, because there is beauty in that.
Right. Jimi Hendrix had a cover of a Bob Dylan song, All Along the Watchtower. And I sort of have that experience of listening to it and, in a strange way, being brought back to the 60s, even though I never obviously lived in the 60s. Wasn't born yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can relate on that level for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in some ways listening to more genres really does expand our ability to convey a different genre. Certainly I'm doing more orchestral type music right now.
Yeah.
Listening to opera helps me in my classical, or even listening to rock helps me in my classical, because people's method of conveying their emotion is different than large choral works, if you know what I'm saying. When you have a conductor who's up there who can convey it in, say, opera terms and go, right here, you want someone's blood, sing it like that. And sometimes I really do wish more contemporary musicians would do that. You destroyed my world, you broke my heart, I want to hear it. You know, but that's my perspective on it, right?
We do hear it, but it's sort of in a milder, tamer, sort of safer kind of music.
Sometimes I want to hear you wanting someone's blood, if that makes sense. If you're that angry, I want to hear it.
You know, what we get right now is like Taylor Swift and stuff like that on the radio. Hey, nothing against Taylor, but...
She's got a great voice.
She certainly does.
Yeah.
Her producer does very good work. And that's not meant as an insult.
Great, we're gonna get sued.
Yeah. What would you say is some of your favorite music, your influences?
That's hard to choose.
Yeah.
I love Lighthouse. I love how they had the brass with the harmonies and the band. I love that sort of thing. I love Queen.
Yeah.
But then I love Mozart. I
Right.
can't not like Mozart. I like Handel. I don't like Handel as a singer, but I like the way he conveys things. The starkness in certain things. You really get a feeling for some of these guys who wrote way back. All they had to do was sit in a room and meditate on what they were writing and meditate on that feeling. And it really comes out in their music, and I really enjoy it. You know, I really enjoy Mendelssohn as well. I like Dvorak. There's a lot of different dead guys. I hear dead guys a lot. I really like what the dead guys do. But then I like a lot of contemporary stuff too. Certainly I love Epka and Nightwish, and that's probably my classical background. I really do have the odd bit of metal that I like. But I also like jazz, you know, Michael Brecker and a lot of different things. So my iPod looks a little schizophrenic. Certainly, and this is probably a weird one, I really enjoy a lot of the more contemporary classical music that's coming out for video games and movies. I really feel that is almost the future for classical music. It's a really great way to get it into the hands of a new generation. Not everybody wants to go sit at the orchestra or the opera every week.
Definitely.
And it's a really great way for us as musicians to be expressing to new audiences.
I'm kind of the same way, yeah. I have a lot of rock and 80s stuff, but I also have, you know, J.S. Bach, one of my favorite composers, and like you said, video game composers, you know, Tommy Tallarico and
Jack Wall.
Yeah. Jack Wall's great. Nobuo Uematsu, you know, a lot of the Japanese...
I've been lucky enough to get to meet Tommy and Jack.
Yeah. Well, I got to interview Tommy, so that was a very cool experience, and maybe we can have him back on the show at some point to talk again.
That'd be really cool.
Be very cool. You know, it was a text-only interview, so you can find it on my website, www.daw-music.com. But we actually, what we did was an audio interview, and then I transcribed it later. So, but it would be cool to have a real audio interview with him and have it on the podcast.
That would be awesome.
But it sort of depends on my ability to line up guests, and that's been somewhat sparse. But
another modern guy. I have a soft spot for Michael Bernard Fitzgerald.
Local musician.
Really great, happy music. He plays guitar.
Actually,
not just vocal.
He would be another great person to have as a guest on the show.
I think what I like about him as a musician, and it's something that we really can't ignore when we're doing live shows, is his way of relating to the audience. He might be a little bit awkward and think he's a little too shy or whatever, but he really draws people in and endears himself to the audience. Yeah. And you can't help but like him. And I found that a little bit with Love Drug too when I went and saw them in California. They just had a way of endearing themselves to the audience. And, you know, you certainly don't listen to Love Drug and think endearing, but having been to one of their live shows, you start to feel that way. And it sounds a little, I don't know, perhaps a little too capitalist, but they almost, you almost want to buy their albums once you listen to these people talk and share who they are. Jan Arden's another fantastic musician for how she relates to the audience, and as well as being a fantastic musician. So you can't discount that aspect of the show.
Yeah, definitely relating to audience is an important subject, and I think that's something that would be good to talk about on the podcast more in the future. You know, one thing I gotta say with a lot of open mics and Calgary musicians that I've seen is there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and we should be somewhat careful that we're not alienating people. I know at times it's useful to have an image or a particular sound. In other words, like if you're a punk rocker, you're going to say some things a certain way, you're going to present yourself a certain way, you're going to play a particular type of music. I think that's good. But as musicians, we should be trying to connect as a community, not so much isolate.
Artists.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll experience that in all kinds of art. You know, you certainly see it in theater, you see it in dance, you see it in visual art, where people come out and they go, I don't care what my audience thinks, it's about my art and me.
Right. And,
you know, there's something to be said for expressing yourself, but who are you going to sell it to? You know, your painting's not really worth $15,000 if nobody's going to buy it because you drew a red spot on it. And there might be somebody out there who does want to buy it, but I think there is that accessibility issue. We won't have jobs as artists if we don't care about our audience.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there is something to be said for that.
The internet has sort of helped with that aspect of being an artist, is we can expose our art to a lot more people and to a wider global audience. Although it still, in many respects, comes down to having good relationships. And if you don't have good relationships locally, it's maybe going to be a little tougher to find an audience globally.
That's very true, yes.
Yeah. So the music industry has changed quite a bit in the last 10 to 20 years. What are your thoughts on the way it has evolved?
One of my thoughts as an artist, especially after Avatar, and, you know, James Horner certainly has a lot of fans, is, are we going to have a job in 10 years?
Right.
It feels like we're being replaced. To sit and go, oh, that was entirely computer generated, not a single singer was an actual singer, scares me as a musician. It's a little frightening to think about the internet age and wonder how on earth are musicians going to make money in this day and age. And the whole copyright issue starts to come up quite a bit too. Like, who owns your work anymore? Certainly with Facebook and everything else out there. It's a whole new environment, and it's a little bit like the Wild West all over again. We're having to rewrite the rules and reset and figure out how to market ourselves in a way that's fiscally viable, but also allows us to be artists and connect with people.
Yeah, it's very difficult to be an artist without the proper resources backing us, and it has been a problem and an issue throughout the age. But if Bach didn't have a piano, he wouldn't have been able to compose and write the music that he did. So it's very important to realize that, you know, us artists and musicians do need fair compensation. And I'm also looking at you, government, because I think there's more that you could do to help artists and their careers. It's not like we can work 60 hours a week at something and then pursue our art on the side. It's very difficult to actually live that kind of lifestyle.
It's very draining.
Yeah.
I certainly find that when I have heavy concert weeks. You know, by the end of the week, I'm a zombie, and I really do wonder. I have fallen asleep on stage. What am I doing for thank God I'm sitting in the middle of 300 musicians, and I hope like hell nobody spots me. But what am I actually giving to the audience? And I do get up, and every time I'm standing up and singing, it's every ounce of my being that I do put out there.
Right.
How much of my being is there left to give?
And that, I mean, part of that is creative work is draining. And I know that
Very draining,
for
yes.
having taught guitar for over 8 years now.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the end of the day, you can sort of feel like, well, I want to work on my stuff, but
Yeah, we can, we can sit and go, government, I'm looking at you, and we can also get a little innovative too, and I'm hoping we will improve that as artists ourselves.
yeah, no, I definitely agree. I don't think it's firmly in the government's hands to say that would be,
But it is funny to see, on the other side, all the push for athletes in the Olympics and all the money backing them. And
Exactly.
honestly, Olympic athletes couldn't do it without government funding and corporate sponsorship either. So, I do see a push coming from doing some administrative work. Not necessarily some push, but a shift in fundraising, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
Looking more towards corporate sponsorship of the arts. Having worked on a festival board, there's a lot of different organizations that are sitting down and going, how on earth are we going to survive with
Right.
the government environment we have right now? Certainly I've been to conferences where everybody's sitting there going, how do we get corporate money? How do we convince people to like us and want to give us money so we can do our art?
Yeah.
So there is certainly that running around. You certainly do hear it in the community.
One of the things that even Seth Godin talks about, I believe there's a book called The Purple Cow, that if we just drove by the road and saw a cow, we wouldn't notice it. But if it was purple, we might stand and watch and see what happens. And that's sort of what us artists have to look to do in a way, is just to stand out. If you're a violin player in the orchestra, somebody else can play what you're playing and replace you. But there's only one Yo-Yo Ma in the world. Mm-hmm. There's only one person that does what he does. Mm-hmm. And so, in a sense, becoming, as a musician, a Yo-Yo Ma as opposed to second violinist.
Becoming yourself, really.
Yeah, definitely. Any thoughts on social media? Facebook, Twitter, MySpace? What are your thoughts?
I have to admit, I'm not as technologically advanced as I should be. I have to admit it.
Yeah.
I still have a flip cell phone. I had a temp in a couple weeks ago who saw my phone and went, how ancient is that? I bought it 2 weeks ago. The kind of person who hates when other people butt dial me.
Yeah.
I think, maybe it's a liberal thing that I've got in my mind or whatever. I get a little irritated with our constant need to be entertained. And
yeah.
I feel it stifles creativity. And as a result, I don't have a TV. I do have a computer. I do have Facebook. I've certainly used Facebook a lot less than I used to. So I've seen social media make people stars, and I've had the opportunity of seeing some of these musicians in action who got their start from social media. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think it's great that we have this new audience that we can connect with. But I also sometimes wonder if we're being a detriment to society with the constant entertainment, if that makes any sense.
If you have any questions or comments regarding this podcast, send an email to comments@daw-music.com. So in closing, what I wanted to talk about was the Toyota incident. Angie already knows what I'm talking about. And one of my goals for the new year, and actually one of my taglines, so to speak, is transparency. So I thought I would at least share it with you. I want you to know beforehand that I'm neither endorsing nor, what's the opposite of endorsing?
Scaring people off of?
Yeah. Let's just say I'm not trying to advertise for Toyota or
slander
Toyota,
Yeah.
but this is the situation as it happened, as it unfolded in my life, and think what you will. But basically, in mid-November, my Toyota RAV4, which is what I've been driving since about 2001, 2002, broke down, and there was a problem with the transmission, and I sort of figured that out from talking to friends going, oh yeah, that sounds like your transmission.
Felt like a transmission.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely felt like it. Those who have been riding in my car would notice.
Yeah.
And I called up Toyota and said, well, I'm having this problem with my transmission. Can I bring my vehicle in for servicing? And it was due for servicing. Well, maybe a little overdue.
Yay for starving artists.
Yeah, exactly. And they said, well, we can't actually bring you in until November 29th. So there's a 2-week gap between that, and I said,
Part
well,
of that was the storm damage from the hail that a lot of people had, so you do have to give Toyota credit for that.
absolutely. And also, a lot of people were switching to winter tires at the time, so they probably would have been pretty busy. Later, I was informed that they probably should have been in touch with me or allowed me to bring my vehicle in simply because the vehicle was basically undrivable. So I figured my options are either miss out on a ton of great gigs, opportunities, workshops, and my regular job, which is teaching guitar right now, or I can get myself a rental car. So of course I went with the latter. I went and got myself a rental car, and I drove that for 2 weeks. Finally was able to bring in my RAV4 with some trouble. Because the transmission was pretty busted, and they called back and said, well, look, we're going to need to keep your vehicle here for 2 weeks because your transmission's gone and we're going to need to replace the computer, which they told me were under warranty. So $4,000 in parts under warranty. That's definitely a bonus.
Better than a kick in the pants.
Yep, for sure. After that, again, I had to drive my rental for another 2 weeks, and at which point I called up and said, hey, it's been 2 weeks. How's things coming along? And they say, well, we're waiting on this part to arrive. Ultimately, they didn't call back till December 27th. So in total, I drove the rental for 6 weeks, about 41 days, I think is what it came to.
Ouch. Rental company loves you.
Yeah. I went down to the rental company, returned the car. They said, well, it looks like you've driven this a little longer than expected. And I said, yeah, well, the reason's because my vehicle's in the shop and all this kind of stuff. But all in all, they treated me really well. And they were like, well, are you happy with our service? And I was like, yeah, the car worked out. Yeah, it worked out fine. It was actually not a bad little car, the Nissan Sentra compact.
Your guitars didn't get their usual space, though.
Yeah, that's true. My guitars weren't seated where they normally would be. Yeah. And then went to Toyota right after that because it was in the area. And they said, here's your bill. And I talked to the assistant manager. That's who I was talking to at first. I didn't realize it. But I just said, look, I have this expense of driving this rental for 6 weeks and probably roughly 4 weeks longer than expected. And apparently it's not their policy to give you a courtesy car, so I didn't have that either. I just brought that to their attention and, said, well, basically he went through a bunch of paperwork and procedures and talking to other staff. And he says, well, we're going to try to submit this as a case to Toyota Canada to get you reimbursed for your rental, but you're still going to owe us the $600 for this servicing appointment, which I thought was a little odd considering I was 2 weeks late. So I went and talked with the manager and just brought this to his attention and said, well, it's, the parts arrive when they arrive is basically what he told me. My case has been submitted. They've informed me. Probably not before I submitted it, though, because I called in pretty much after that happened. So we're going to see what happens. I may get reimbursed for hopefully all of that amount of the rental. But all in all, it was just kind of one of those experiences where, well, I couldn't get in my car for 2 weeks. Then it was sitting in the shop for 2 weeks. And then they told me it wouldn't be finished for another 2 weeks. So that was a little rough. Any thoughts, Angie?
Well, having just come from spending a month in a rural area,
yeah,
it sounds a lot like the big city. Customer service feels a little dead nowadays.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? I mean, it just seems like there could have been...
That's not how I was raised.
What is exactly my incentive for going back for the same service?
Yeah.
I've always felt that the service fees were a little expensive. I mean, that's subjective. Depending on who you ask, I'm sure that's different. But I always thought, okay, one day it's going to 80, and over the years it's gone up. It's been like 120, and then 200, and then 300, and 400, and 600. It could be because my vehicle's getting older, but I don't think that's the only reason.
Yeah, I mean, I could recommend a mechanic who I know has excellent service, but you might have the same issue ordering parts. So.
Right. Now, most mechanics are at least pretty good about setting you up with a rental or some kind of courtesy car. So that would be the difference there. So, yeah, these are the ages we live in, I guess. But I think companies should be aware that there are forms of media, like the podcast, for example, where we can openly talk about these things, and blogs, and review sites, and Foursquare, and all kinds of social media, that this message, if people feel that it's unjust, that it's going to get out there.
Well, I remember hearing a statistic when I worked in customer service. If someone's happy with your service, they'll tell 4 people.
Exactly.
If they're unhappy, they'll tell 17. And
there you go.
If anybody remembers the United Breaks Guitars debacle.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
I'm involved with a group on Facebook now that's really frustrated with the way airport security goes. And
oh my goodness.
In Canada, I've never felt so violated, and shortly after seeing somebody else feel violated. And a Calgary airport, hate to say it, their security is incredibly not good. I felt safer and more respected as a human being flying out of Halifax. But after my experience in Calgary, I think I'm going to take the train or boat if I have to, because I should not be treated like that to get on a plane, and I don't necessarily feel safer. I feel less safe going through some of these things than I ever did. And, I shouldn't be reduced to having an anxiety attack requiring medication and then being treated as though I'm a criminal because I got upset. Because I was simply scared or even being told that my doctor's stupid. by somebody who makes minimum wage.
Right.
That said, I have a friend who works at that exact security, Calgary airport security. I honestly will never do it again.
Right. Yeah. Airport security. I remember hearing that on a recent podcast as well.
I thought it was just American, but my boobs did not need to be grabbed that many times.
Yeah. It's what the TSA or the PSA in the States?
I can't remember what it's TSA in the US, and I cannot remember the name for it in Canada.
Yeah. So TSA. On the podcast I was listening to, they were talking about the TSA bikini girl who basically walked through security with a bikini, sort of just to prove the point of why do we need to be searched?
There's been more than a few people.
Yeah.
Let's get into some stuff I didn't want to get into with the airport security. I've been assaulted. Having somebody I don't know touch me without really knowing what's coming. I had no idea. I thought that was simply American security. I'm all excited to go on my trip. I get through security and I walk up to the first guard who says, "You're going to be subject to a physical pat down." Like with a wand? No, we're going to touch you. And I got very upset immediately. Only after requiring medication and just about passing out did they offer me the option of going through a scanner. But due to recently having had cancer, another thing I didn't want to sit and discuss with these people I've never met, and I'm discussing it on a podcast, but people need to understand what they're if you're going to take a plane in Canada, be prepared. Having to tell somebody now that I've had cancer in cells that your radiation is going to rest in, and my doctor told me not to, and then they looked at me and said, "Well, your doctor doesn't know what she's talking about." My doctor went to school for 10 years and specialized in cancer. Probably went to school for more than 10 years to specialize in it. You're telling me my doctor doesn't know what she's talking about? Yes, it's completely safe. Well, I think I'd rather err on the side of caution and listen to my doctor.
Yeah.
And then I had to do this pat down in which, because of the show, because I was upset, because I was having a panic attack, I was crying, I was very emotional because I was not looking forward to someone grabbing me there.
Yeah.
And then getting grabbed there, and then having my boobs repeatedly touched, which feels like a power trip. I don't ever really wish to go through security again. And in just getting off the plane from Halifax and going through the Calgary airport, I started to get upset again.
I think this is something that people should definitely be aware of if they're looking to take a flight anytime in the near future.
I've heard of musicians getting hassled at the border, and I've seen, I've helped a friend put together back all their lighting equipment and sound equipment because, border guards decided to pull it apart because you're a rock and roll band and you got to have drugs in there somewhere. Yeah. And I get that because people will do it. I know as an Irish dancer, shoes were banned from Ireland for a while. They were putting cocaine in the tips of the shoes. Certainly happens. But to get on a plane, once you start sexually assaulting people, and that's how I felt. I spent my vacation having backflashes and nightmares. That should not have happened.
No.
And I'm still anxious when I think about airplanes.
I wish I could remember exactly what he said, but I believe this was Seth Godin who said something about it's the price we pay for security. Like, we're actually not more secure, but we pay a price for feeling more secure, as it were.
I didn't feel more secure.
And that's the interesting part, yeah.
They've proven that if you want to stick something where the sun don't shine, and it's metal, it won't be seen.
Right.
Which is a little weird because they can see my tampon on one of those things. I don't need somebody knowing whether or not, sorry, I'm getting a little, you're a guy, but they can see that on one of those machines.
Right.
So, you know what, if you know what I mean, like, if somebody wants to stick something there, the metal part will go off, but if they can't feel it when they're touching you, they have no idea. Whereas with the metal wand, my grandmother had to explain why her knees went off. Yeah, she's got metal knees, makes sense. But if you're getting a beep from some odd place, you actually have to ask the passenger, and if they can't explain it in a way that's acceptable, I've got a metal derriere, well, that's kind of a little odd.
No kidding.
You're going to have to explain it, or I'd rather see sniffer dogs. What are you going to get past a dog? Not drugs, not explosives. You can't really fool a dog.
Right.
Properly trained one. Or, it's been shown there are other countries with less invasive security and higher rate of actual physical security. Why aren't we trying to learn from that?
And isn't this like how it is with faith as well? Like, the more we hear about the 10 Commandments and how much we're supposed to obey by them, the less we actually feel like the more we hear about the favor that we have in Jesus, that we have this grace, that we tend to move more towards God in a sense. Yeah. So it's kind of a similar situation.
I don't know if I feel safer as a passenger getting felt up and having people and then that's another issue for some assault victims is they have the choice between being seen naked, and they don't show you on television quite how graphic it is. I've been told by a security friend. It's much more graphic. So you have the choice as a victim of assault, and I hate to think of myself as one because I'd like to think of myself as doing pretty good now.
Right.
But you have the choice of somebody really, you don't really get a choice whether somebody sees you naked or touches you. You have to do one or the other. And that just doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel safer.
No.
Like, what's safety, if that makes sense?
No, I think that's pretty outrageous, the way things have gone with security.
Yeah.
Hopefully at some stage they rethink or revise their plan. I know there are malicious people in North America, but let's face it, I think the vast majority are mostly well-meaning people who are maybe a little bit prone to being angry sometimes.
And that goes back to losing our sense of relationships and community, really.
Right.
We were discussing earlier, but I
mean, if we don't have that. Even with terrorist attacks, when you factor that in, I think you're still more at risk of dying from being hit by a car crossing the street. Right. Statistically, I can't quite remember, or car crash, I can't remember which one works out. Well, ever since 9/11, right? But
it's like there's a statistic. I met somebody who's afraid of using toasters because something like 600 people a year die. Did I meet somebody or did I see it in a movie? But I remember hearing, 600 people die per year of using a toaster, so don't use a toaster.
Huh.
Oh my gosh, it's a toaster.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's some kind of record saying 200 people die a year of a cold. I mean...
more than that.
Probably many more.
The H1N1 thing happened. I was at higher risk because I've just had throat surgery, and I've got asthma. Did I run out and get a shot? No. Yeah, it was a rough flu, but I get a rough flu every 5 or 6 years. I got pneumonia 6 years ago. This one was a rough flu. I felt it for a while after, but I feel fine now. Does it mean I'm going to panic every time the flu happens?
I wouldn't. I think that's only going to add to your...
And as someone who's in school for a natural modality of healing...
Yeah.
I certainly think it's a little excessive. I mean, there is a place for quote-unquote traditional medicine. Medicine that we've only had for a couple hundred years, not even, but there is a place for that kind of medicine, but I don't think we need to be given to panic all the time.
Yeah. I think that's an important point, and I think we should attempt or try to be healthy in the natural sense. If we have stress in our life, we need to figure out what the source of that is and deal with it.
And we need to be present and in the moment. If we're always worried about what's coming next, if we're always, oh my gosh, if I get on a plane, it might blow up. If you're always doing that, you're never going to enjoy the moment you're in. Stuff happens. You could die tomorrow. And if you're not enjoying today, I mean, what kind of life did you have?
Yeah.
You know, or you could live to be 95 and spent 95 years worrying. Who had a better life? The guy who died at 20 enjoying every second, or the guy who lived to be 90 sitting in the corner like all clenched up and freaking out about something?
Yeah.
What kind of life do you want to live?
And call me crazy, but in the States, it just seems like let's keep people afraid and unhealthy, and that's just the way they...
It's a little excessive. I did live in the States for a while. That's a little excessive.
If you tune into media, I think there's maybe... There's maybe a difference between, but, statistics have shown that on average, people watch 5 to 6 hours of TV a day in North America. I mean, that should tell you something, that if you took even an hour out of that TV schedule and meditated or relaxed or read a book.
Bubble bath.
Yeah.
Went snowshoeing. Oh my gosh, I love snowshoeing.
We'll take 1 hour and do something that's actually going to be...
Quilt. It's your first pink interview. I mean, what are you going to do? Needlepoint.
Sure, why not?
Play some music.
Well, we've gotten a little off topic, but, that's kind of... our thoughts on that. Well, thanks again for joining me today, Angie. Hopefully we'll see you in future episodes, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. This is fun.
Awesome. Glad you had fun. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks again for tuning in today.
This podcast is a part of the Blueberry Network. You can find this and other great podcasts at blueberry.com. That's blueberry with no e's.com.
You've been listening to the David Andrew Wiebe Interviews and Music Business Podcast, broadcasting from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. This has been a Red Flame production. To learn more about Red Flame, go to redflamerecords.com.